that we will be more than merely hearers, but also doers of your ways and of your words. Father, I'm thankful for those who have chosen to be with us, and I pray that you guide Tammy and my mind and words, that the things we share certainly will reflect our experiences, but more importantly, will highlight the importance of your ways when it comes to homes, to families, to marriages, and to parenting. Father, I pray for those who are parenting. There are, with each generation, struggles, and certainly this current generation is no exception. There are challenges that we never thought that we would be facing, and so we pray for not just your wisdom, but your constant providential care for all of these and their children. Again, Father, we're thankful for your Son, Jesus, and may our life reflect that thankfulness each and every day. My prayer for all of us in Jesus' name, amen. Um, when my kids were little, simply put, I did not have the patience to teach them how to tie their own shoes. I heard everything from bunny ears to around the corner and through the. I knew how to tie my shoes, and it bothered me that my kids didn't pick it up right away. I was so happy when the first Velcro tennis shoes, we could actually get up and run out in a hurry to Dairy Queen and it not take 45 minutes. It still did because they didn't know where their shoes were. But Tammy's dad, who is extremely patient, taught, if not all of my kids, most of my kids, how to tie their shoes because he was super patient with them. Today we're going to talk a little bit about discipline, and I fear that sometimes discipline races to where's just the Velcro approach to discipline. I just need this to be over with, and sometimes that means we race very quickly from 0 to 100 on the discipline scale, and at the end of it, somebody's going to jail. That's just the way it feels because we start dealing with urgency over importance. And so what we're going to talk a little bit about today is the real plan for discipline in the home. And again, it's obviously going to be more appropriate to those of you who have younger ones who still have a lot of parenting ahead of you. But I do think that there's good principles in here, not only for parents, but for all of us as we think about how it is that God parents us. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. From a non-biblical, or maybe I should say non-scriptural, but still a biblical perspective, we like to think about discipline as being the guardrails along the side of the road. I was born and raised in Colorado. Tammy and I raised our kids in Colorado. And if you drive up the mountain passes in Colorado, it goes back and forth and around the mountain. And you'll notice often at curves, especially if there's a steep incline on the other side, there's a guardrail. And the guardrail serves a couple of purposes. Number one, it is a notice to us as we come up. Usually there's reflectors on it that says, hey, there's danger beyond this, right? And then it also serves as valuable if we stray from that path, from that road, and we bump the guardrail. Though it does a little bit of scraping and a little bit of scratching, it still presents us less danger than at the bottom of the chasm. And so discipline's that way a little bit. Discipline warns us of danger ahead, and discipline also then, if you will, punishes us in a minor way in comparison to what the major consequences could be. There is one thing that's very characteristic about guardrails, and that is the fact that they're always in the safe zone. You don't put the guardrail at the bottom of the chasm. Now, I don't think you're all highway engineers. Don't expect you even to accept the illustration, but you'll understand this. When you tell your kids, let me just ask real quickly, how many of you had, when you were growing up, a curfew? You have a curfew? Robert, raise your hand, buddy. I know why you're in discipline. Okay, just out of curiosity, do you remember what your curfew was?
Yeah.
What was it?
10 p.m.
10 p.m. Why 10 p.m.?
Nothing good happens after dark.
That's right. Nothing good happens after 10 p.m. I will just tell you, and I'm not a first-hand knowledge, but I'm just telling you, I found out that that's where most of the fun stuff happened, was after 10. I'm finding out now that there are parents that are giving midnight and even 1 o'clock. I know shocking to me. I think they just are glad that their kids are gone. Don't come back for a while. But the idea was this: when the kids say, "Why? What's the big deal? What's 10:15?" And the truth is, I can't say this real loud, but the difference between 10 and 10:15 is negligible, if at all. But we put it in the safe zone, saying, "Listen, we have set this in an area that we believe, in our judgment, our wisdom, is safe." And so when they go, "Yeah, but it could be further," it could be further. But the further it gets, the more we risk it being in the danger zone. Tammy and I first visited the Grand Canyon. The older I've gotten, the more I'm uncomfortable with heights. It's just weird, because I'm going, you know better, you're not going to fall, you're safe and everything. But we're at the Grand Canyon, and it's a pretty big hole in the ground. And there was a rickety old chain link fence that was still somewhat based on the safe zone, but I'm kind of doing the, up to it. And my oldest son, who was at the time probably about 16, 17, shoved me in the back right up to that fence. And I turned around, I told him, I said, "I'm not saying this is dad to son, Christian to Christian, Wayne to Josh. I'm saying this man to man, you ever do that again, I'll kill you." With my bare hands, But the point was that even with that rickety fence, I understood what? Beyond that lies danger. And so discipline is not just about shoving our kids against the guardrail. It's about trying to warn them, trying to protect them. And so we want to talk a little bit about the idea of discipline. So discipline is going to be training, along with what we may often refer to as disciplinary action or disciplinary correction, and even punishment towards a specific end. And so it becomes a training by action, not just an academic exercise.
And training, and I think this is sometimes where it becomes overwhelming as parents, because when you see that word training, there's work involved. And so you have to be involved with your children. And so often, the way that we think we're going to discipline or train our children is we're going to isolate them. I'm going to keep them from the world. I'm going to protect them. I'm going to protect them from sin. We're all going to box up in the house, and we're going to stay here. And I've done my Christian duty for my children, and I've isolated them from sin. And that's not our role. Our role is to prepare them to go out into the world. That's our role as parents, is to prepare them to be able to live out there. But sometimes choosing the isolation way of disciplining seems easier, and it can be, because I said so. You're not leaving because I said so. You're not going to do that because I said so. And never giving them any training, any sharing, any instruction. You're just telling them, no, we do this because we're going to stay here, and we're going to stay safe.
Yeah. Now, there is certainly a place for a degree of isolation, right? Flee wickedness.
Yeah.
Stay away from these things that are dangerous. That is part of discipline. But the idea that we can fully isolate our children, or for that matter, even ourselves, from a hostile world is kind of a futile action, because if our kids don't go to the world's going to find their way to us. And it has been our experience, but is being corroborated by some statistics now that we're down, that families that really try to isolate their children from everything, and this is not about homeschool versus public school, it's not about private school, but they just say, listen, I'm going to be able to protect them forever. Remember what we said yesterday at our first session? Our job is how do we equip them for when we can't hold on to them anymore. And so there is a place for a degree of isolation, but to expect that we're going to protect them fully. And so what do we do beyond that? And so beyond isolation is then we're going to insulate our kids. Any of you know the movie A Christmas Story by any chance? Remember the younger of the two boys got insulated by his mom to go out into the snow? For those of you who haven't seen it, he gets they've got this over padded snowsuit and boots and gloves and scarf, stocking cap and hood, and he is almost immobilized, right? Because mom goes, danger, 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 danger. And though I believe the intent is right, sometimes our idea is that we can get our kids to memorize a lot of scriptures, and that's going to answer every problem they come in contact with. In other words, the more I can insulate them. Now, is insulation important? Sure. Live in a house that doesn't have insulation and you'll find that you have no protection for the elements. In other words, insulation equips them to walk into a hostile world without being negatively affected about it. But it isn't just about a series of verses that they can sling at them like it's ninja stars, but instead it's about training them in a way that there is a level of protection. Let me give you just a very quick example. When I grew up and went to junior high school, I had a seventh grade science teacher. Mr. Westland was his name. Mr. Westland was not just an atheist, he was a militant atheist. Mr. Westland was missing two fingers by birth on one hand. He had a physical deformity of his hand because I remember one time we had a discussion about how mutations were valuable and made a species better. And I asked him one time about, does he think that he was better with three fingers? That I didn't mean it disrespectful, but the point was he was that. Today, people going, oh, our teachers, they're throwing evolution down their throats. Well, they did it at my school too. It may not have been the principles of the administration as a whole or the school district as a whole, but he was militant about it. How did I function within that? I'm not speaking pridefully, but I'm saying because my parents, when I came home, said, let's talk about what you've learned. Let's talk about those things and go through them. And so there is a place for providing a barrier. We're going to talk a little bit more about how we do that in just a minute. Am I going to do the next one? Okay. So it used to be that I used to say that there were three principles: isolation, insulation, and then I always said imitation because that's Jesus, and Tammy's going to talk about that. And I had a cousin who is a cattle rancher, and he came and said, you left one out. I said, what? And he goes, inoculation. And I said, okay, doctor. But his point was this. Typically, when we talk about a vaccine, it is to introduce in a minimal, manageable amount that particular virus in such a way that the body then can build an immunity. And he said, with our children, we're going to keep them away from sin, but we've got to protect them to go into a world, but sometimes we've got to do what? We've got to let them try to swim on their own. My brother illustrates it, I think, beautifully when he says our kids are like a water skier behind a ski boat. He says they are tethered to the boat, but they are allowed a degree of latitude to move side to side. Break the tether and what? They don't water ski anymore. So the idea is that we're going to allow our children a degree of rope, praying that they don't hang themselves with it, but it's allowing them to go out and test that, bring them back in and see how they have done. And so there is that, let them go the first time with the car. You're not going to be able to go with them. Let them go out for that first time with a young man or a young woman that they have an interest in. I can't be there for all of that. I could try to maybe double date them or whatever that is. Someday I'll tell you stories about double dating and you'll go, okay, you better go with triple dating because double dating isn't necessarily safe. But the idea is what? We're going to let them out a little bit, not completely throw them out of the nest, but let them have an opportunity to fly.
Our daughter-in-law shared with us this past week a story of our grandson, and he's in the 6th grade. And he plays, I don't know, they think he's going to be a professional baseball player, I think, because he plays baseball in an elite team. He's very good at it. And went to the World Series and all this and came in second. But anyway, they let him make the choices. Now, they were going to draw the line if he didn't make the right choices, but they wanted him to go to the coach because a lot of the practices were on Wednesday night. And they said, we want you to make this choice. We want you to go be the one to explain to the coach what your choice is, why you're making the choices that you're making and that you're going to miss those practices. You get to explain that to him. And so my grandson, Marshall is his name, Marshall went in and talked to the coach, and when he came back out, he shared with them that he had told the coach, I'm sorry, I know it will affect the team, but I'm not going to be there because I want to go to Vacation Bible School that night. And he chose that, and they didn't even know that's what he was going to tell the coach. And he said, that's more important to me than practice, and if that affects the team, I'm so sorry, but this is important to me. And they were so proud of him because they had been doing these things in his life to prepare him to make the choice. They were ready to step in if his choice wasn't the path that they wanted him to be on. But they wanted him to try to make those choices himself. We need to do that with our children because our whole purpose behind this is we're doing these things. We're trying to protect our children. We do isolate them from certain things. We are insulating them and we are inoculating them like we talked about because we want to train them and raise them up to be imitators. That's what we're wanting. We talked about this yesterday. We want them to be imitators of Jesus. That's our whole goal in training, in disciplining our children. And we're going to get more into discipline. But these guardrails that we put in place, as they start out here and they get narrow, or they get narrow with no, 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 I said so, and then you start giving them more leeway in your guardrails. But the goal is righteousness. That's what we've been talking about. Our goal is to guide them into righteousness. And so this disciplining, this training that we're doing is leading them to righteousness.
Yeah, so you have God in the form of Jesus, as we described that personality of the Godhead. He leaves home. He goes to a hostile world. He eats among sinners because he has a responsibility, which is why he came. He lives sinless. And so we see that, okay, then how do we help our kids navigate those same waters? And the answer is by developing a system of discipline that helps them to, simply put, I don't mean to oversimplify it because it's still complicated, to be like Jesus. And so discipline has this really important place. And so as we kind of lay this down, I'm just telling you right now, we're not going to give you the whole, is spanking right, is spanking wrong, those are some decisions. I do wish we had invented timeout when I was a kid. You know, it's the old, yep, I thought about it, you were right. And I'm going to play, you know. I would like to have been able to sit down after discipline, but that's another time altogether. So there are some important things, though, that as we head into a discipline plan, and this is the first thing I always want to say is about being intentional. I think a lot of discipline plans come on the fly. Couples who haven't had children yet don't discuss it. Couples that have children don't discuss it. It's like, you know, one of them walks into the bedroom, closes the door, and goes, "There's a lot of them out there. I don't know what to do with it." You know, it's kind of like we're not too worried about the cockroaches until we turn on the kitchen light and they're everywhere. And it's that kind of, what are we going to do? And it comes a little bit of a panic.
And I think the importance of having a plan, but being flexible in your plan, is because when you have multiple children, you know that disciplining one a certain way does not work with all of the others. So having that flexible plan and figuring that out can be really interesting.
And Tami always reminds me, homicide is against God's law and against the law of the land. I am not always given to turn to a translation called The Message, but sometimes as a dynamic translation, I think it captures the essence of it. Just listen to this particular passage. It's from Hebrews chapter 12, verses 5 through 11. But just listen how, in maybe a modern vernacular, the Hebrew writer, the writer of Hebrews, because we don't know if he was a Hebrew or not, but the writer of Hebrews says this, or records the words of God this way: "My son, don't be angry when the Lord punishes you. Don't be discouraged when he has to show you where you're wrong. For when he punishes you, it proves that he loves you. When he whips you, it proves you are really his child. Let God train you, for he is doing what any loving father does for his children. Who ever heard of a son who was never corrected? If God doesn't punish you when you need it, as other fathers punish their sons, then it means you aren't really God's son at all. They don't really belong in his family. Now, since we respect our fathers here on earth, though they punish us, should we not also more cheerfully submit to God's training so that we can begin to really live? Our earthly fathers trained us for a brief few years, doing what was best for us as they knew how. But God's correction is always right and is for our best, that we may share his holiness. Being punished isn't enjoyable while it's happening. It hurts! Exclamation point in the text. But afterwards, we can see the result, a quiet growth in grace and character. I think that's a really great way to look at it, and it might be the kind of thing that allows you to sit down with your kids and maybe phrase it in a way that they understand. We'll talk a little more about that conversation of discipline in a minute. Yesterday I mentioned we went to the scripture and said, okay, let's find a family that exercises discipline well. And we struggled to find that, right? And so we went back to where we did before, and that is, okay, how did God discipline his children? This isn't a Bible lesson per se, but I found that the principles of discipline resided in one instruction that God gave to his children, Israel. Listen what he says. He says, the Lord God's, this is from Exodus chapter 21 through 6. You can look at it on your own. God spoke all these words, saying, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. So I kind of think in terms of, hey, I'm your mom, I'm your dad. I've always been here. I'm here to take care of you. That's my ultimate objective. But then he goes in with this instruction that we're pretty familiar with. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make an idol for yourself in the likeness of what is in heaven or above the earth or beneath it or in the water under the earth. You shall not worship them or serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquities of the fathers on the children and the third and fourth generations of those who hate me, but showing loving kindness to thousands, those who love me and keep my commandments. He goes on in Exodus 34 and kind of reiterates that, listen, I'm going to guide you, and there will be good things if you follow my lead, and there will be consequences when you follow your own way, your own path, and disregard mine.
I think it's real important that as we look at that, as we looked at what the Hebrew writer had to say, and he's talking about discipline, that discipline, we understand the Lord's discipline for us comes out of his love for us. And so as we're training up these children, our discipline for them comes out of our love for them. We're doing that because we love them. We're wanting to form them to be respectful children that have good manners or whatever it might be, that they follow Jesus. We're doing that because we love them. That's our goal for them because we have that love for them. And now I remember telling my kids, do you like me when I'm behaving like you like it? When I have to discipline you? And maybe you should make different choices. But telling them, I love you. I'm doing this because I love you. And then going to bed at night crying my eyes out because I feel like I was spending all of my time in the discipline section. And it took me stepping back and realizing, because it was the moment in my life that was what I was doing. I had all these littles that I was trying to focus and get disciplined and instructed in a certain direction. And it was because I loved them. And so understanding that discipline comes out of love. That's where it comes from.
We had one preacher that said it this way. He said, rules without love is abuse. And I had to think about that because it permeates everything that we're getting ready to talk about here. Is I don't just mean the ooey gooey feeling, but it's that kind of love that seeks the well-being over another. Because I will tell you, many a night you go to bed going, I'm the worst dad ever. Not because I haven't disciplined them, but like Tami said, I feel like that's all I've done is discipline them. And that's who they think, mean dad. My kids now tell me, we didn't think that. I'm like, why didn't you tell me then? So extracting from what God told Israel, we kind of identified 4 steps, 4 principles, 4 components to a good discipline model. And I think that they make allowances for you to exercise those to some degree as is fitting for your family. The principles are broad enough, if one dare even call them axioms, by which you can count on in discipline.
And the first one is instruction. We looked at Deuteronomy 6 yesterday. If you weren't in here, go look at Deuteronomy 6. And it's to teach your children. Our job is to instruct them, to do that for them. And it even starts, I used to be, when I was a young mom, I used to be annoyed with other parents that I would see talking to a 3-year-old and going, now what I want you to do is put your shoes on, because if you don't put your shoes on, your feet are going to hurt. And if your feet hurt, then you're going to be sad. And I'm going, just have them put their shoes on.
And then scientists told us it's better if they don't wear shoes. Shoes are really bad for their feet. I went, shh, don't tell them. We got them on, okay? So.
But instruction is so important, and it is important. When they're little bitty, when they're this baby size, there's a different kind of instruction that is going on there. It's more of a bending their hand or that kind of instruction. But then as they're growing, explaining to them why you're doing this, why you're sharing this with them, why you're instructing them in this manner, it helps them understand that it's not just list living, rule living. There's a reason behind the things that you do. Not just because all bad things happen after dark. That you're going, no, wait a minute, the stars, God created those too.
Yeah.
But
that's the rebellious Tami. Though she's using some of those things. So here's what God says. And by the way, I ask a lot of parents, when they talk about a kid that's giving them problems, I'll say, have you made it clear what the rule is or the way is or what you expect of them? And many of them are honest and said, no, because they should know that that's wrong. They should, and the answer is, no, they don't. You need to, if you want to have rules at your house, sit down with your kids and say, we're going to write them out, we're going to put them on the refrigerator. These are the rules of our house. If you want to go to, they have Hobby Lobby up here.
Yes.
If you want to go to Hobby Lobby and buy one of those things that says, we only laugh, we hug, and yeah, okay. Flip it over and put the real rules in it. The soul that sinneth, it shall die. Okay, that's the other one. But you write down those rules. So what does God say to Israel? He says, I am God. I'm the one who's taking care of you, and you shall have no other gods before me. But really good kids leverage those commandments to say, okay, I know what you said, but you said 8, but you didn't say 8 p.m. Right? I mean, they'll find a way to twist that instruction.
We got to where we'd have our kids, I want you to repeat back to me, what did I say? What have I asked you to do? What are you being told to do? And they would do that. It was the clean your room thing. Give them instruction, go clean your room. And my children would go in and they were overwhelmed. It was like, I don't know, and they'd start playing, I'd enter the
Or they'd
room.
push it all into the bed and go clean.
Yes.
So instruction had to come back and
It
do
did.
what?
It did.
And had to modify the instruction so that basically you kind of go to that next step.
I actually bought them a book on how to clean your room, and it took them through step by step by step. And it made a difference in our relationship towards each other. We weren't angry, we weren't head to head. So writing those things out for them or drawing them out for them, because it started when mine were little, giving them that instruction is so important for them to be able to know what you expect of them. And that's why God gave us His Word, so that we know what He expects from us, because He loves us, He wants to take care of us. It's the same way with your children, making sure you're planting those things in their head and in their heart. That's helping in the transforming of them.
It's just the last page of that book didn't have, now put this book back on the shelf where it belongs. It was always in the middle of the floor. So the kid comes in and says, you told me clean my room, right? They slid it under there, or they just dumped clothes and everything in the toy box, and they went clean. Remember the objective? So God says, don't have any other gods before me. And Israel goes, okay, in that case, we're just going to carve this piece of wood or stone, and it will be representative. So God has to come back and say, let me make it clear what I meant when I said that. So when our kids violate the law, they break the rule, they don't act in keeping with the instruction, we're like, what? Oh, 0 to 100, time for punishment, Bring out the chains, we're ready to, and God says, no, that's not the way I handled it. I said, I need to correct it for you. I need to make sure that you understand clearly, right? And it may be as silly as saying, you and I both know that I meant 8 p.m. In fact, the statement I used to make with my oldest son as he began to test the boundaries. I said, I refuse to play the sorry, we don't say that word anymore. I heard that's the new the STUPID, okay? We're not gonna play that game. Because that means you act like I'm that, and I act like you're that, when we both know that's not true. But nevertheless, it was time sometimes to say, when I say clean your room, I mean that you need to be putting the toys in the toy box and the clothes either in the dirty clothes pile or in the laundry room or hung up if it's appropriate. I had to come back through. Why? Because they're going to say, my version of clean the room is get it off the floor and out of sight. I don't know where they learned that from, but every time Tami cleans the house, the garage is a mess, right? We just move it out there. So I clean the garage, and you know what gets messy? The house. I bring it all back in. Yeah. So we have to understand that it requires a correction, and a correction is paired alongside it. We have instruction, correction with warning. In other words, sometimes it requires, I told you to clean your room. You chose not to clean your room. In God's case, it was, I meant no graven images. That's having a God before me. I meant clean your room, and if you don't, then there's a consequence. Sometimes the consequence isn't well stated, and so when it happens, it comes as a surprise, and sometimes the reason that the consequence comes is it comes unexpectedly even to us. We react in anger, and now all of a sudden, there wasn't a plan that said, listen, here's the instruction, here's the correction, and here's the possible punishment for that. And so you may need to say, I want you to clean your room, and I need to be cleaned this way, and you have 30 minutes. If not, you'll not be staying up to watch the movie with the family tonight. You'll not be going to that birthday party. Then there will be some other consequence. So I heard one family that they said, if one of the kids didn't clean their room, they paid one of the other kids to do it out of the first kid's allowance. He said it fixed it really fast for them. But after the instruction comes that correction and warning that just simply says, hey, I want to be clear on this, make sure we're on the same page and understand, and here is the potential consequence for that particular action.
So then understanding that after those things are given, instruction is given, correction is given, if it isn't followed, there is punishment. It's the same way in our lives. If we don't follow the speed limit and the policeman pulls us over, there is punishment. So it's a real aspect of life. So figuring that out, well, what is that going to look like with your children? It is a good idea to have a plan beforehand, to have thought things through, but it doesn't always work that way. So be very careful of what bounces out of your mouth when your child is if you're wanting to discipline your child, because sometimes it's easy to spout off something that you're not going to follow through with. And if you're not going to follow through with it, it's not punishment. In fact, they've learned to bend you.
Exactly.
And so understanding that, figuring out what the punishment is. Our youngest son, I mentioned yesterday, our youngest son has a very strong, the strongest of my boys, and very stubborn. And I learned that I had to tell him, starting about the age of 7, you're going to be punished. I got to step away, and we're going to think about this, and then I'm coming right back. Because I didn't want to punish him out of anger, because my initial reaction is you deserve a spanking for whatever that was. Well, you could spank that boy till his arms fell off, and it didn't transform him. And so that wasn't a punishment that was fitting him. And I realized right away that if I was spanking him, it was because I was upset with that boy, and I wanted to show him that. And so I had to step back and realize that's not molding him. That's not doing that for him. I had to step back and look at what's going to transform him. And it was a process figuring that all out. In fact, it was, okay, then you go to your room. And he's like, fine, my stuff's in my room. It's like, go to your room and get on your bed. Fine, I'll take a nap. And I'm like, okay, what? So we found out with that child, If I set him in a chair in the room we're all in, and he can't speak and he can't participate, that was
Oh, yeah.
punishment.
Yeah, so here God looks to Israel and says, okay, the consequence of not obeying this is going to fall upon the fathers and their sons. Now, theologically, we can really wrestle with that, but this is what I think it says. The implications of your disobedience now is long-reaching. It's not just about he was saying about the consequence and possibly alluding to eventual enslavement and the loss of. I think he's saying this. The reason I'm saying this now is so that it will be good for you for the long time, for the long haul. This isn't just, I need the room cleaned up now because it's messy. I'm trying to teach you principles that will serve you a long way. An old-timey gospel preacher named Guy N. Woods, I remember one time, he used to end his sermons with a question and answer. And it was asked one time, do you believe that capital punishment is a deterrent? And he said, well, it certainly is for the one they execute. Right? In other words, the death penalty prevents it. So I think when we talk about punishment, you need to understand that it's kind of twofold. Number one is, it is a direct consequence of the action. Remember the guardrail? You have bumped the guardrail. This is going to skin your fender. This may even crack your tail light or crack something else. But I'm just telling you, it's better than what the consequence that lies beyond. Sometimes the kids don't see beyond to the consequence, and all they know is, hey, you're scuffing the fender, Mom. And she goes, that's right. So it is a direct consequence, but also it is what? It is to be preventative for future. It's to say, I don't like sitting in a chair. I don't like going to my room. I don't like missing that activity or event. And therefore, it is molding me to say, if for no other reason, I want to avoid the consequence in the future. Because see, we're shaping a pattern. If they only think in terms of consequence, it can be dangerous because they go, I know I'm not supposed to be with a girl and have intimate relationships before we're married because I might get a baby out of it. So I'll just make sure I avoid the consequence. So we have to be clear on those consequences and so that they'll act that way. But nevertheless, punishment has that place. But there's a fourth element, and I know it was for us, and I think it is for most parents. It is the portion of discipline that gets left off. You know, we all have done that. If I've told you once, I've told you 1,000 times of instruction. We wait till your dad gets home of consequence, and then dad got home, and guess what he was wearing? A belt. I mean, I'm just saying, we all know that. But the last part is God also says in there that there is a reward for right living. You don't have to answer this, Danielle. I already pointed you out once, but anybody in here get paid for grades? Paid for grades? You remember how much?
$1 a B and $5 an A.
Yeah. The going rate right now is $20 an A from people that we talked about. I know. I'm thinking about quitting my job and going back to school and just seeing if I can somebody pay me for my grades. Nope, because an F still gets 0. That's right. But we don't think in terms of that, right? Because we don't always reward good behavior because what? It's the expected behavior. So what happens when we go in and say, I want you to clean your room. And I want you to clean your room this way, this way, this way. And I want you to do it in 30 minutes. And if you don't, there is a consequence. But how about if we say also, and there's a reward for that? Now you may go, because I never got paid for my grades, and I went, that's the dumbest thing ever, except for the fact what? When we put God's way in front of us, God does not simply encourage us with the whip of punishment. In fact, I would say we are wrong to make that God's lead in discipline, that you want to be alongside of God or else you're going to reap punishment, because what? He says, no. Let me tell you all about all the good things that come for this. God told Israel that if you are obedient to me, he says, it's going to go well for you in the land. In fact, I'm going to give you the land you haven't worked for. You're going to prosper. You're going to multiply. All of these benefits. The hope is in time that they learn that The relationship with God is full of great blessings, not just land and giant grapes, okay? But the point is this, that we sometimes need to make sure that the reward is part of our discipline plan. Because we want them to, this is beyond my pay grade a little bit, talking about psychology, but what I understand is that most people will not move from one condition to another condition until it is less painful in another condition. And you say, well, that's ridiculous. Someone who struggles with alcohol, and I know there's some chemical things going on there, but somebody says he's an alcoholic, he's lost his family and all that. How come he won't move to a better place? Well, his better place is inside a bottle, right? So for him, this is most comfortable. So, because over here I got to deal with my life problems, my difficulties and all that, but here I don't. It doesn't make sense to us because we're not there. But what we want it to be is not just painful here, but we want it to be better here. We want it to be more comfortable here. And by more comfortable, I mean that there's less problems, but there's reward. I met a man who was in charge of he was a former police chief in South Carolina, but he had Virginia, and he had gone on to work in the penal system with young men who were repeat offenders. And he said, we came to learn that prison wasn't a deterrent for them. He goes, for some of them, it was 3 square meals and a place to stay, and they didn't have that outside. There was a sense of belonging and community inside the prison. And so as soon as they were out, they were back in. Because what was outside was no father figure, no job, death and problems all around. And he said, we found an incredible deterrent to crime was to give them something that was worthwhile for staying out. And he says, and the reinforcement of positive things has done so much more for them than just simply, as you're leaving here, you don't want to come back. They're like, I don't know, I don't care. So that system of reward is really, really important.
I'm actually watching that now with our youngest son, the one I was just talking about. Daniel has 2 little girls. They're 8 and 5. He's dealing with those strong personalities now that are coming out in his girls. And he and his wife have developed a reward system that is working better than the punishment system had been working for them, to get the girls to do things around the house and for the girls to see that the positive things they do bring out a better part for the whole family. And so they've got a big calendar of stars and things on the refrigerator that every time they show politeness or good manners or whatever, they have a whole section of things that they do. The girls receive reward stars for those, and then they get a reward once they hit their goal, and then they start all over again. And it's helping shape them with a reward system, and it's working for them with these pretty strong little girls. But we're also wanting, as we're using this discipline, we're wanting to help our children develop self-control. Now, I believe self-control is behind the whole issue of getting our children trained. It is teaching them this isn't about you, getting them to understand that you have to learn how to control your behavior. You have to learn how to control your mouth. You have to be obedient. You have to respect the rest of the family and follow the rules that the rest of the family are following. All of those things they lie in self-control. Now, this isn't an easy thing always to teach, especially if you have strong children. If you have strong children, it can be a real issue. I had a young mom tell me, she said, well, he's strong, and, I don't want to really break his spirit. And I told her, I said, if his spirit is, because she was dealing with, he was disrespectful towards her. And I said, that part of his spirit is sinful. And so you need to shape that. You're going to need to help him learn some self-control where that is concerned, because that's a sinful aspect. You can't just let that go. Now, one of my sons had a self-control issue. Everything he thought came out of his mouth. He is better now that he's a daddy, but everything he thought, he's very direct, very blunt, and it hurt people's feelings, and those people that aren't blunt don't understand that. If you are a blunt person, you get it. But he finally had a girlfriend in college. He thought she was the one, and she broke up with him because of the way he talked to her. And he came back to me and he said, Mom, you know all that talk of self-control? I get it. I get it now. He says it has cost me. And he has learned that you have to control those things when it's not Christ-like. So explaining that, all of this instruction is getting your children to understand that they're wanting to control themselves because they're wanting to imitate Jesus. And so it's not about them, it's about them trying to follow Jesus and imitate him. So that's the importance of self-control.
And I don't even like the idea of self-control or self-discipline, because self is who gives us in all our trouble.
It is.
But what we really do is we're shaping from external discipline an internal discipline that when it encounters, remember, we want on one day to be able to let them go. And we have developed, well, I think it illustrated by a kid in a cartoon I saw one time who says, "That's right, Mom, I've had enough of this place. I'm leaving you and Dad. Would you mind tying my shoes before I go?" And that's what we want to do. We want to teach them to tie their own shoes, right? We don't want to tie their shoes as a 30-year-old man so that they can leave and go about their business. So we're teaching them to say, hey, not here's what Mom and Dad made, but then to say, I'm going to set my own guardrails. My own guardrails about time. My own guardrail about activity. My own guardrail about alcohol or tobacco or drugs or any other thing, good or bad. He begins to say, or she begins to say, listen, I have developed a principle that says, listen, I want to be careful about not doing harm to myself, not doing harm to others, being like Jesus. And those principles is not my list of the things on the refrigerator, but now they begin to create their own. So when they go into systems where, one, I never gave them direct instruction, or systems where I'm not there to give them direct instruction, they're able to say, I can function in this. I'm going to stay away from this here, or I need to be very careful here, or I need to remember the consequence here, or how much better my life is when I behave this way, and to develop a discipline that doesn't require our direct discipline.
And we all know adults in our life that weren't shaped that way. Wayne had an older woman at church approach him a few weeks back, and the way she approached him, when we got in the car, Wayne goes, I felt like it was a toddler that had thrown themselves in the floor. She hadn't gotten her way. And she just chewed him up one side and down the other. And it's the same thing.
And there was not much left, so it didn't matter anyway. I have 5 kids, but
that's when we don't teach our children that self-control, they grow up and become those adults
that aren't adults.
Yeah, that don't know how to behave. And that's not what we want for our children. That's not going to draw people to them so that they can tell them about Jesus. That's going to push people away from them. And that's not what we want for our children.
So this way we can put one more principle in here. It's discipline related, but it's not discipline in of itself. Stories told of a father went in and told his son, I need the room cleaned up. Said, I want the room cleaned up this way. If you do not clean it up in 30 minutes, you're not going to the particular activity. I forget what it was, camping or something. And he came back in 30 minutes. The son was sitting in the middle of the floor doing nothing. And the dad said, okay, I'm going to clean your room up for you. Of course, the kid was great with that. And he goes, and going to the movie, you get to go to the movie. And I think it was a movie now. And he said, but I won't be going. He said, I'm going to suffer the consequence of your disobedience. Because somebody's got to pay that price. And so there is a place to allow for grace and mercy for your children and for yourself. We are not perfect in every regard. We're going to sometimes lash out in ways that we just almost instantly went, that was not good. Use those opportunities to say, hey, there is a hard line. But even God's hard line has what? It has a redemptive aspect through the work of Christ, and use that as an opportunity to teach it. And then when you lay down, give yourself some grace and mercy too, because God knows your intent and all of that.
I have to tell a story that Wayne did. It was one of his great.
Always nervous about these.
I know.
Go ahead.
You don't know, I'm telling it. Our 2 older boys had gone out. I don't remember what they'd done. They broke curfew. They'd done activities they weren't supposed to do, nothing horrible. Our kids were great, but they broke curfew. So they came in and Wayne was talking to them, and Wayne took off of his shelf. Wayne likes NASA. He wanted to be an astronaut when he grew up, but he had a space shuttle that somebody had made him out of wood. It was beautiful. And when the kids came in, Wayne sat them down and said, we've talked to you about this, we've talked to you about that. He said, but I want to show you, there's something, we need to show some discipline here. We need to show some consequence. And I'm going to take that consequence for you. And he broke that space shuttle. And our kids to this day remember that. And both of them said, man, after Dad did that, it hurt my heart so bad. I wish he just spanked us. I wish he just lectured us for an hour.
Even a blind squirrel finds a nut once in a while, and then I actually had forgotten about that. We don't normally include that in our seminar, but it was one of those deals of going, listen, there may be greater impact in you understanding how consequences play out. That when you do things, it's not just you. I mean, we have a daughter that had an affair 12 months into her new marriage and left her husband, and it was a consequence on a young man of 24 that said, what just happened? And and his family, who had become dear to us, and the consequences that even to this day ripple and say, this is not just about what's my life and I take the consequence. There are consequences beyond that. And so I don't just mean that in a punitive way, but I mean also in the way of saying, listen, if you understand by me showing grace a greater significance to the action consequence thing, that's better. So instruction, correction, and warning, punishment when it's deserved, and reward appropriately as well. If you had to do 4 takeaways, when somebody says, what are they talking about in there? You go, I don't know, he broke something over somebody's head and she had to rescue him out of jail. I don't know. Anyway, so that's what we're going to do. We're going to take a break here. I don't remember exactly. I don't have my schedule right in front of me. But that's the same list there. So
Starts again at 4 o'clock.
4 o'clock. Oh, you're in great shape. So those of you who finally got, all the kids got quiet. This one's just looking at me like, let's just keep, he's grinning. You guys, we're just going to talking. Anyway, turn to Genesis 1:1 and following. Here we go. So take a few minutes. Again, remember, you might use this door in case they're not quite done, but I think he's done out there. About 15 minutes, 20 minutes, we'll be back in here as we talk about some big steps. We talk about first steps, talk about some big steps that we have to take in some difficult circumstances that maybe are a little bit down the road for you. And thanks for being here, everybody. Filled up nicely. All of a sudden, I thought it was going to be John, and I can't get said to John in 45 minutes what I need to